Welcome to today's deep dive. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources on the table for you today. We're looking at a profound, honestly, almost jarring
Oh,
contrast.
absolutely. It's quite the mix.
Right. So we are going to examine the absolute bedrock of modern society, the universally accepted frameworks of human rights and governance, and then we're going to look at a philosophical text that attempts to completely deconstruct those very foundations.
Yeah, we're pairing some heavy hitters today. We've got the 1948 United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we're looking at that alongside the 2000 Constitution of Finland.
Which are, the ultimate safety nets on paper.
Exactly. But then we pair those foundational texts with a highly provocative, really radical philosophical essay by an author named Peter Hakkarainen.
And there's a visual component too, right?
Yes, there's a striking visual of a vintage-looking stamp, plus a summary document that ties all these concepts together. It basically argues that modern bureaucracy might actually be the enemy of fundamental human rights.
Which is a wild thought. Our mission today is to explore that profound tension between these beautiful ideals of universal equality and the author's argument that our modern system of rigid laws is actually working against us.
It forces us to confront a severe theoretical tension.
But before we jump into the mechanics of this deconstruction, we really need to establish a mandatory baseline for you, the listener.
Right, the impartiality disclaimer. This is crucial.
Very crucial. The sources we are unpacking today, specifically the essay and the summary document, contain very strong, highly politically charged critiques of modern government. They critique the concept of representative democracy as it currently exists and the entire framework of our legal system.
And we want to be incredibly clear here. We are not taking a side.
Not at all. We are neither endorsing the author's radical viewpoints nor condemning them. Our job today is strictly to impartially report on the content provided and help you unpack the philosophical ideas in the original source material.
We are just your guides through a really complex, often disruptive philosophical landscape. We're just looking at how the author arrives at these conclusions.
Okay, with that out of the way, to understand the sheer scale of the author's critique, we first have to look at what he is actually rebelling against. Let's establish the ideal as it exists on paper.
Setting the baseline.
Exactly. So we're all familiar with the core tenets of the 1948 UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Adopted December 10th, 1948, it was this massive post-war attempt to establish a global normative baseline.
The core idea being that all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights.
Right. It outlines protections against torture, ensures freedom of speech, establishes rights to education, and work across 30 articles.
It sounds incredibly comforting, right?
It does. It universally codifies the concept of inherent human equality. However, the Declaration itself isn't technically a binding legal mechanism. It's a statement of principles, which is where the Finnish Constitution comes in.
Exactly. The source material contrasts the UN Declaration with the Constitution of Finland, which entered into force in 2000. This constitution takes those abstract universal norms and hardwires them into the highest binding law of a sovereign nation.
It's the ultimate law of the land there.
Yes, it explicitly dictates that all public power must be based on law. It guarantees the inviolability of human dignity. And crucially, it goes way beyond basic negative liberties,
What do you mean by negative liberties?
like freedom from interference. The Finnish constitution actually guarantees positive social rights, things like the right to basic subsistence, medical care, and free basic education. And it mandates that these belong to everyone within its jurisdiction, not just official citizens.
So if you're there, you're protected. Think about how comforting that sounds. It's the ultimate safety net. But to guarantee those positive social rights, to make sure everyone actually has medical care and education, a nation has to construct a massive, highly organized administrative state.
You can't deliver universal health care without a massive bureaucracy.
Right. You need the machine.
Yeah.
This represents the modern ideal, a powerful, structured state apparatus using its authority to enforce equality and protect the vulnerable. And here is where it gets really interesting.
The visual hook.
Yes. Our sources provide this brilliant visual representation of this idealized state power. It's a vintage stamp featuring a classic depiction of justice. You have an angel holding a sword in one hand and the scales of justice in the other,
And beneath her feet is the word valtio.
which translates to state.
That image of the Valtio stamp perfectly captures the traditional, widely accepted view of governance. The state is supposed to be this objective, almost divine arbiter of justice. The scales represent the perfect balance of fairness.
And the sword.
The sword represents the state's monopoly on legitimate force, which it supposedly only uses to protect that balance. But the philosophical essay by Hakkarainen argues that this entire image is a dangerous illusion.
It completely deconstructs it.
It does. The core thesis of the essay is that the state does not exist as an independent, towering entity capable of objective judgment. The state is nothing more than the sum of its citizens.
Just the people.
Okay.
And if we follow that logic, a profound paradox emerges. The UN Declaration and the Finnish Constitution both explicitly state that all citizens are fundamentally equal.
Right.
If every single person making up the state is entirely equal in dignity and rights, then there is no natural hierarchy. So Hakkarainen argues that if we are all truly equal, the entire concept of power, the idea that one human has the inherent authority to rule over another, is essentially a philosophical mirage.
He calls it a psychological flaw rather than a natural law.
Right.
He delves really deeply into the psychology of this dynamic.
Yeah, the psychology of bureaucracy is fascinating.
It really is. The author posits that the desire to rule, manage, or legislate the behavior of others stems from a psychological and moral illusion of inequality.
So bureaucrats think they're better than us.
In a way, yes. When an individual or a class of bureaucrats feels the need to govern others, they are operating under the false, internalized delusion that they are somehow inherently superior, more capable, or wiser than their peers.
And the sources detail the societal fallout of that delusion. It creates a deeply toxic psychological environment for everyone. For the people being governed, it causes suffering, fear, and a learned sense of subordination.
It strips them of their autonomy.
Exactly. But it damages the rulers, too. The text argues that holding this artificial power makes the ruling class arrogant, while simultaneously filling them with a constant, paranoid fear of losing their position.
Or having their illusion of superiority exposed.
Right. According to the author, this psychological fragility is the root cause of all the endless cover-ups, defensiveness, and obfuscation we see in modern bureaucratic institutions. They aren't protecting the public.
They are protecting the illusion of their own authority. Which brings us to a really striking concept in the text, the dead state.
The dead state. This is where I want to use an analogy. Imagine a group project at school or work. Everyone starts out equal, trying to get the job done. But then, someone decides they need to be the manager. They create spreadsheets, reporting rules, meeting protocols.
And suddenly the rules of the project become more important than the people actually doing the work.
Exactly. The manager spends all their time enforcing the spreadsheet compliance instead of helping with the project. That is the dead state.
That's a great way to put it. When this illusion of power takes root, the natural, empathetic flow of human interaction is severed, and artificial hierarchy forms. And to maintain that hierarchy, bureaucracy is born.
So bureaucracy is just the physical manifestation of this psychological delusion.
Exactly. The essay describes the dead state as a state that operates as a completely separate, independent entity from its citizens. It develops incredibly complex institutions not to serve the people, despite what that Valtio stamp might suggest, but simply to serve its own internal systems.
It's an autonomous machine. It values the preservation of its own structure above the lives of the humans who created it. Which brings us to the massive aha moment from the summary document.
The paradox of legislation.
Right. We generally operate under the assumption that laws exist to protect our rights and guarantee our equality. But the summary document argues that this sprawling bureaucratic legislation actually puts citizens in a state of illegality and inequality.
To understand why that matters, we have to look at the historical context the author provides. Originally, the concept of law stemmed from much higher intrinsic principles: humanism, internal conscience, religious concepts.
The text specifically mentions Christian pillars of love, non-judgment, and spiritual equality, right?
Yes. Historically, the law was meant to be a flexible moral guide designed to harmonize individual happiness with the well-being of the broader community. It was supposed to be a positive force promoting peace.
But the modern disconnect is staggering. The essay argues that the law has been entirely mechanized. We've moved from internalized moral guidance to externalized, rigid compliance.
And that's a problem, because no two human cases are ever exactly the same. Different times, different places, different contexts.
But the modern bureaucratic machine attempts to force completely unique human lives into the exact same rigid legal paragraphs. It strips away their humanity.
By attempting to standardize human behavior through mechanized statutes, the system becomes algorithmic. Think back to that Vail-TO stamp. The author views it as the scales of justice no longer being balanced by an angelic figure using wisdom.
The angel has been replaced by a bureaucratic algorithm.
Precisely. The law becomes an abstract, highly technical game that only a few bureaucrats and politicians actually understand. It detaches from its original humanist purpose.
I want to relate this directly to you, the listener. Have you ever been penalized over a minor formatting error on a form? Or maybe a slight delay, and you felt completely powerless against the machine?
We've all been there.
You know the feeling. The strict letter of the law clearly violates the obvious spirit of the law. The bureaucrat across the desk might even agree with you, but they say, I have no power here, I have to enforce the paragraph.
The summary document argues that in that exact moment, the bureaucracy is committing an illegal act against your fundamental human equality.
It turns you into a victim of the rule of law, rather than a beneficiary of it. You become a subordinate data point instead of an equal human being.
The state transforms into an inescapable labyrinth where the individual loses their self-worth and autonomy simply because the mechanized system dictates every outcome from the top down.
So the author has diagnosed the disease, the illusion of power, the dead state, the mechanization of the legal system. So what does this all mean for the future?
Well, the essay doesn't stop at mere criticism. It proposes a highly radical vision for the future. He wants to completely dismantle the administrative state as we know it.
Let's break down these solutions because they are sweeping. First up, abolishing the political party system entirely.
The author views political parties as destructive forces. They are formalized factions that maintain the illusion of inequality.
Because of party discipline.
Exactly. When an individual enters government under a party banner, they are forced to prioritize the strategic interests of their specific group over the actual well-being of the whole nation. The essay explicitly compares this dynamic to a constant state of war.
So different ideological armies fighting for control over the bureaucratic machine.
Right, and it prevents representatives from using their own independent wisdom or conscience. They just act as controlled agents.
But without political parties to draft laws, how do we make laws? Well, the essay suggests ending rigid lawmaking entirely.
This is perhaps the most paradigm-shifting proposal. He suggests replacing laws with recommendations.
Recommendations. Instead of statutes backed by the threat of state violence, the sword on the stamp, just recommendations.
Yes, aimed at increasing societal understanding and empathy, rather than inducing a fear of punishment. Because every human situation involves infinite variables, every single case should be judged individually.
Based on conscience and true subject matter expertise relevant to this specific case, not a dense book of statutes.
Exactly. But to even attempt that, you have to fundamentally restructure the architecture of government. The author argues for dismantling state administration as a ruling body.
And replacing it with what?
A council of the wise.
Okay, wait. Doesn't a council of the wise just sound like a Supreme Court or an aristocratic ruling class by another name? How does that not just become a new hierarchy?
It's a fair question. The distinction the author makes relies entirely on enforcement. This proposed council would not hold traditional coercive power. They wouldn't control a police force.
So they act purely in an advisory capacity.
Correct. Stepping into immediate complex disputes where standard recommendations aren't enough. Their authority comes from respect for their wisdom, not the threat of the sword.
And what happens to Parliament? The essay suggests it should just be a massive, completely open discussion forum. Zero censorship, zero manipulation.
No backroom deals by party leaders. Representatives would be chosen for their life experience, and they'd be fully accountable to the people, speaking plainly so any citizen could understand.
There's one final critical component to this radical restructuring. The author explicitly warns against the state acting as a corporate entity or a business.
Yes, the protection of state assets.
He argues that the state must never operate on principles of corporate profit, which makes sense within his framework. If the state is quite literally just the sum of its equal citizens, it has no authority to sell off shared infrastructure for the benefit of special interests or political parties.
Privatizing public goods for profit is viewed as an act of theft against the equal citizens in this philosophy.
Let's take a moment to synthesize all this. We started by looking at the universally accepted, highly structured ideals of the UN Declaration and the Finnish Constitution. These documents try to guarantee human equality by building a robust framework of legally binding protections.
But then, Hakkarainen's essay inverts that entirely. He argues that true equality actually requires dismantling that very bureaucratic legal machine entirely.
Because trying to categorize and administer human behavior inevitably destroys genuine human connection and true equality.
It's a profound contrast. One view believes justice is achieved through binding legislation and a strong administrative state. The other believes equality is only realized when we strip away rigid laws and return to a society based purely on individual conscience.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we need to firmly reiterate what we said at the start.
Absolutely. Our purpose today was exclusively to synthesize and explore these challenging philosophical arguments found in the sources. We are not endorsing the dismantling of the government or the legal system.
We just want to give you the intellectual tools to think critically about the invisible systems and rules that govern the world around you. And to that end, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to consider.
Building on the material, ask yourself this. If we were to actually dismantle our rigid written laws and rely entirely on individual human conscience and a council of the wise to settle disputes, would human nature naturally default to the harmony and love the author envisions?
Or would the absence of strict rules inevitably allow new, unchecked hierarchies of power to rise in their place?
It's a lingering question that cuts to the core of human psychology.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a new lens to view the nature of authority. Keep questioning the world around you.